Hello, my dear viewers. I'm Olga Demchuk, a researcher of the inner world of personality. Today I want to talk with you about gaslighting and abuse. These are trendy words that many people use, often without fully understanding their meaning. What is gaslighting? Gaslighting is when another person drives you crazy. They replace your reality and tell you that reality is not what it actually is, but rather what they say it is. I decide what is real and what is not. An abuser is someone who scolds you if you behave in a way they don't like, or praises and encourages you when you do what pleases them. People who are at a certain stage of development will inevitably fall under the influence of gaslighters and abusers, and at the same time, they themselves will also become gaslighters and abusers. Let's figure out why I make this claim. Those of us, especially those who have been on my channel for several years, know about the ideal and the real self. The ideal self arises as a superstructure that monitors conformity. And the ideal self governs the real self through control. It tells you what to do, what is right and what is wrong. And a child needs this superstructure because they are small, they still don't understand how reality works, and they need to survive. And this ideal self is formed based on the demands made by the caring adults around the child, teachers, caregivers, parents, grandparents, nannies, and so on. In other words, the child is very much like a trained animal that diligently does exactly what they are told, behaves properly and appropriately, and is consistently rewarded for their good behavior. And if a person has not fully matured, has not adequately evolved to the point where they are truly able to think critically and independently, they will inevitably continue to depend heavily on these ingrained, often unquestioned notions and established ideas of what is universally considered proper. Wrong, bad, good. This is clearly and profoundly seen in moments of self-aggression, when a person truly begins to destroy or bury themselves. They find a mistake in themselves, they find a flaw, and begin to scold themselves internally. This is a kind of vulnerability that the personality cannot overlook in itself and starts to pick at. And many people don't understand this. Well, self-aggression is painful, self-aggression is unpleasant, you feel terrible, worthless, and inadequate. Why do I do this to myself? Because this ideal self is overlooked. Because when we point out someone else's flaw, find their mistake, tell them how they should do things correctly. Remember, abuse and gaslighting. The abuser praises correct behavior and punishes for what they see as wrong. So when we tell someone what to do, what language they should write in, or what language they should use to make videos, it can feel quite satisfying to point out what is correct. But what about when someone tells us what to do, or when we tell ourselves, we simultaneously become both the one being gaslighted and abused, and the one acting as the gaslighter and abuser? So I've carefully prepared some detailed drawings here for you. That is, we have a certain real self. Here it's symbolically shown as a small gray circle, and there's an idealized layer above it which pokes at us with a sharp stick whenever something isn't right. With this same sharp stick, we poke at others when something isn't right, pointing things out, and in turn we experience the same ourselves. It's as if I would stand like this and tell you how you should live. This is the wrong way to do it. The right way is like this. Well done, you're good, you're doing everything right. Good boy, good girl. I could certainly tell you wonderful stories in engaging videos with a heartfelt voice, which gently suggests to you what I want. This pleasant, gentle, persuasive tone I use when I speak to you, as if you were little, naive children, and I'm about to tell you how you should live. This is right, that is wrong. Or from this position of authority, I talk about certain bad people, giving you the opportunity to be good, but at the same time, I'm also imposing who is bad and who is good. And this position, this instructive, punishing, rewarding stance from above, will inevitably be passed on by a person to another. This is that object of the ideal self, the one who supposedly knows how things should be done. So, when we enter into relationships with someone, the psyche determines what position it will take in the interaction. Will I be the ideal self, the one who is better, who tells others how to live? Or will I be the naive real self, the one who is told how to live? And many people, bloggers, lecturers, consultants, offer a person this little chair, so to speak, over which they loom and deliver their message. And if a person hasn't brought the relationship between their ideal self and real self into their awareness, they won't even recognize this dynamic. They won't even understand how to engage in conversation with others. They'll just listen to the words and focus on their own feelings, whether it feels pleasant or not. And for a person who is used to gaslighting and abuse within themselves, they might even enjoy being told what to do. They might even ask, what should I do? Essentially, this is like a diagram where there's some kind of superstructure with the ideal self, and there's the real self, which doesn't grow. That is, my real self hasn't learned to understand how the world works, how certain processes happen. I'm used to getting quick instructions from my ideal self, and that's why I expect all bloggers, lecturers, and consultants to tell me what to do, because it's fast. It's faster than delving into something and trying to understand it. If I don't necessarily need to understand how my vacuum cleaner works in order to fix it, things are a bit different when it comes to my inner world. It's the foundation, it's what I live with, and here I have to learn to understand. When we talk with you about gaslighting and abuse, the first thing we need to do is learn to recognize all these processes within ourselves, how we talk to ourselves. After all, our subjectivity is in fact a distortion of reality. That's why it's so difficult to break free from these pathological relationships with ourselves and with others in which we seem to submissively allow ourselves to be used. Or there is a second way of communicating when we, on the contrary, dominate and tell others what to do. I have the opportunity in group settings to observe how group members interact with each other. During rotating sessions where one person in the group is the analyst and another is the client, I see how, often unconsciously, they enter into these dynamics between the real and the ideal self. So, if I am truly guided by my ideal self, if I haven't thoroughly reconsidered this internal structure, and I unfortunately have an abusive relationship with myself, then what happens next? Then I won't be able to recognize when someone else is violating my boundaries. That is, a person might pressure me, speak to me arrogantly, or treat me like a small child, and my psyche won't perceive this as something wrong. Something is going wrong. You can't treat me this way because I talk to myself like this. It's an absolute norm in my relationship with myself. And in the same way, I won't recognize when I violate someone else's boundaries and start speaking in an authoritarian, commanding tone. Here I have conditionally depicted the state when I'm a child. I need someone to tell me what to do. Or on the other hand, when I am huge, when I dictate how things should be said. This kind of equal communication is a conversation between two individuals. And it is unattainable if I am constantly in these abusive relationships with myself. So when we talk about our subjectivity, it's important to understand that it strives for a world named after itself, where everything always goes the way I want. This is the main substitution of reality. In other words, I don't understand how reality is structured, what my place in it is, who I really am, how much of an expert I am, and what abilities I possess. And this is a constant dream of being chosen, of being special, of being right, and of the world someday becoming the way I want it to be. In fact, people we call abusers and gaslighters are also convinced within their own world that they are doing everything right. They want the world to be the way they think is best for it, and they force others to serve the world named after themselves. And this is present in us as well. And when this hope to shape the world in our own image is not let go of inside, then we will constantly be confused and not understand what is happening in relationships, not understand how this person is speaking to me, not understand how I'm speaking. I won't understand, for example, why people shy away from me or why the people around me are always of a certain type. When a person enters into a relationship, as I mentioned, they choose their place in this chair. Either they loom over others or they make themselves small, and sometimes it happens. No, actually, it doesn't just happen. Often people don't understand why they start to bleat, why they take on a submissive role, why they allow others to dominate them. If we want to get to the root of it, the foundation of every subjectivity is the imposition of one's own world, one's own self. In my view, a sense of greatness is fundamental. And any animal wants to dominate. It wants to make its master submit to it. And when a person tries to speak without dominating, without instructing, they compress their personality so much that they become this bleating, ingratiating figure. In other words, I don't understand how to speak as equals. I have two options. Either I press and dictate, or I listen and submit. With admiration, watching and allowing myself to do whatever I want. And if I can't dominate or instruct, if I realize that I can't really manipulate this person, that I can't really tell them what to do, then I slip into this bleating state. But this circle, outlined with a dotted line, where I stand with my feet on reality, where I don't swing between insignificance and grandeur, somehow feels inaccessible to me. That is, people don't hear themselves from the outside, how they speak, what tone they use. It's as if the words themselves seem quite realistic, but the way they're spoken reveals the person's actual state. When we talk about this internal abuse and gaslighting, we're also talking about a host of related problems that accompany these processes in real life. For example, there will be significant issues with personal boundaries because a person will either have no boundaries at all or will be in a state of rigid defense. In other words, it may seem as if they are maintaining their individuality while in a state of opposition to everyone else. This is when we enter a group and we might either withdraw into ourselves, or if we do start to interact, we act like a little dog wagging its tail, eager to please everyone. We can't seem to plant our feet firmly in reality. What can we do about this? When you feel like asking someone what to do about it, it means you don't want to figure things out for yourself. You don't want to learn to think independently. It's better to ask how all of this works, because understanding how it all works will give you the ability to choose. It is precisely gaslighters and abusers who take away your ability to choose. In other words, they deprive a person of their will and impose their own will upon them. In the same way, when you ask what to do, you have already given up your freedom. You are already seeking those instructions that will tell you what is right and what is wrong. Observe. Notice the state within yourself. People tend to think that being a gaslighter or an abuser only happens in rare moments. But in reality, gaslighting and abuse have become a strange kind of norm for a child because they are dependent, but also for adults. A person has not truly matured. They still haven't learned to think for themselves. When you judge another person based on who is better or worse, who is above and who is below. How tempting it is to look for flaws, to find vulnerabilities and gaps. How much you want to give advice when someone is vulnerable. how much you want to teach someone about life, how much you want to point things out, how Olga Demchuk should conduct her creative work, what is right and what is wrong. When you want to attack the person themselves, their individuality, all these little jabs and bobs are directed at one's real self, humiliating it, depriving it of self-worth. That is, self-worth is precisely your own value. Respect for yourself. A person who is caught between their ideal and real self cannot have self-respect, because the real self is initially seen as foolish, weak, and not knowing what to do. For a person, for an individual, it is a challenge to grow up, to become wiser, to evolve, to undergo a personal transformation, because they are afraid to let go of the hand of their false self. And many people learn this way. They load their ideal self with a huge amount of things, new instructions on how to do things right, while their real self does not grow. In other words, all the instructions and all the knowledge becomes something a person will issue to themselves as orders and also share with others, pretending to know how to live. This is similar to letting go of an adult's hand when you become independent. A child at a certain age feels that they can already become independent, that they can rely on themselves. But in this self-reliance, it is important to understand whether I am relying on my false ideal self or on my real self. It is like stepping into the abyss. Many people who try to engage with their inner world and so on, they still want to somehow maneuver things so that the world revolves around themselves. They do not want to take the place that they objectively occupy right now. They do not want to know the truth. They want to hear a pleasant lie about themselves. And letting go of your own subjectivity means letting go of the dream that you are special and always right. It is not an attempt to prove your own righteousness or to claim that you are blameless and that others are simply bad people. And it is not about reproaching yourself, thinking how bad or wrong you are. People who watch my videos often perceive me as someone who tells them what is right and what is wrong. Although in reality, I am simply explaining how things work. They perceive it this way because they absorb this into their ideal self, which immediately begins to attack their real self for being wrong. And this projection of the ideal self will always deprive a person of their sense of self-worth. Honestly, you could give an entire webinar on this topic. It's truly fascinating, especially when it comes to abuse and gaslighting. As always, I'd like to ask you to share in the comments. Do you abuse or gaslight yourself, or perhaps recall a time when you abused or gaslighted someone else? How did you later realize that this was happening? Was it denial or distortion of reality, a desire to tell someone how to live or what to do, or was it punishment for the wrong behavior or encouragement for the right one? A person with a sense of self-worth will feel uncomfortable with that kind of tone in a conversation directed at them. That is, when someone talks to them as if they were a small child. They will understand that the person acting this way is trying to take away their sense of self-worth. The greatest thing parents can do for their children is not to communicate with them as if they are little, but to talk to them as equals, as adults. When I don't tell a child how to live, but instead explain how life works, I teach them to build cause and effect relationships. Leave your comments, share your thoughts, and stay with us. Here, we all learn and explore together how to discover our true selves, to discover inner resources and joy for growth and happiness. Thank you for watching, goodbye, and see you soon.